As the old story goes, a famous scientist was giving a lecture about astronomy and the universe, and after the lecture, an audience member came up and said, "It was really interesting, but you got something very wrong. The Earth actually sits on top of a giant turtle, and that's what holds it up." And the scientist said, "Well, that's also interesting, but what holds up that turtle?" And the audience member said, "Well, that's a clever question, but it's turtles all the way down." And so I want to talk about platforms, and to me, we live in a world where it's starting to be platforms all the way down. So we're going to have platforms on platforms, we're going to have platforms that connect to platforms, platforms that grow out of platforms. And we see that increasingly. So I got to see David Evans, who wrote a book called Matchmakers, present recently. And I loved his idea of matchmaking platforms and the idea of ecosystems. So he talks about multi-sided platforms. And so you think of these platforms as a way to bring people together to create economic value. And the platform itself is unique in that it may not charge for that service, and it may bring multiple groups together. So historically, it's been an idea been around for a while. So we have the bazaar, the market, the agora. And those will be permanent things. In a temporary setting, county fair or a carnival would create a platform that would generate economic value for a short period of time. Today we live in a world where the platforms are increasingly technology-based. And some of the most wildly successful companies in the world are platform companies. And you can think how they match people together with needs. So LinkedIn matches together people who are looking for jobs with people who have those jobs. Uber connects people who want to have rides with people who are willing to give rides. Google brings together people who have websites that they want to be found with the people who need to find those websites. And then other things grow off of those. So in the Google world, you have the whole SEO industry that grew off of that platform to create its own set of platforms. Google also is a platform in the sense that it connects people who have ads to be served to people who want to serve ads to people. And again, a whole advertising business is built around that. Kristen, when she talked about Paladin earlier, really reminded me of a platform notion too that I think is very interesting in the legal world. So in my day job, I am the senior counsel at MasterCard, where I cover our MasterCard's Labs group, which is our innovation group. And so MasterCard itself is a great example of a platform, and is a very complex platform. So although we sort of connect buyers, consumers, and merchants, we're also connecting banks, we're connecting different kinds of devices. There can be underlying processors, there can be multiple payment platforms, and it all goes on around the world. So the notion of this ecosystem has become very important to us. So as a law department, we started to, especially over the last couple of years, as we looked into what was happening, as we started to deal with new technologies and new platforms, we started to look about what was the role of the lawyer. So I used to call myself a transaction lawyer, and I just find that really limiting now. It's sort of isolated transactions, kind of decontextualized. We also, for a while, we were calling ourselves product lawyers, so there was a context, but it was of our own product, and we were either a buyer or a seller. Now our notion is more of an agile lawyer, where we think about the whole ecosystem and the way the platform interacts. And I'm not saying yet that we become the lawyer for the ecosystem, but I think you take into account the impact of what you're doing legally on the ecosystem and what kind of impact it might have on things like critical mass and how do you get these platforms off the ground. So this is an evolving thing, and I'll return to this at the end, but this is what we put together as some of the things that were important to us that are sort of based on traditional lawyer concepts and some of our new approaches. So there is the risk management notion. It's important to us. Data and increasing scale is significant. every day I feel like I'm embracing ambiguity and uncertainty, and I'll give you some examples. We're moving toward metrics like the businesses are. The big one is speed, and can we let things go soon enough? So good and now is better than perfect and late. And then we want to become involved with the business and technology teams. So I want to give a couple examples of some things we've done recently at MasterCard that I've been involved in that illustrate some of these concepts. So Marie Claire was doing a pop-up store, or is doing it. It's called The Next Big Thing. And so the idea is you go into the store, you could go to a mirror, try on the clothes that you wanted, decide what you wanted, so if it didn't fit right, you could get the next size, and then you could pay for it by touching the mirror. And you're thinking, well, that's kind of a cool concept, but how do we think that through legally? Well, MasterCard is not in the clothing business. We're not in the magic mirror business. We're not in the networking business. There's a whole bunch of things. We're payments, so we want to be a piece of that ecosystem. But how do you make that work? How do you trace how data goes through this? How do you put together who's responsible for what? And how do you do that without interfering with the consumer experience? So in this case, think about this. If we had discussions around, okay, if there are 10 different entities involved in this, and then there are some phone calls that definitely felt like this was the case, how many privacy policies do we have to put in front of somebody? How do we do that? How is it ever going to work if I have to click on this mirror in the fitting room while I'm trying on clothes through a whole bunch of terms of use? So we have to sort of think in terms of how can this possibly get off the ground if the legal process is a barrier to consumer experience. So that's one approach sort of at the higher end. This is one that I've been working on that really interests me. This is called Tukuze, and there's a great video out there on YouTube of this. And the idea is that we're helping create a market so that small African farmers in Kenya who have crops to sell, can find somebody who will buy it, find the price, make that match, take it in, have it weighed, have it graded, and then be able to get paid for that either in cash or through a mobile money system. And it raises, again, all sorts of interesting legal issues, because if you look at the experience here, we're saying, oh, let's throw some click-through agreements on this. People are using this through texting and through SMS. Now, can you imagine the terms of use going through SMS? It's just not possible. So we have to start to think in new ways. And then also it's creating this ecosystem that has become, to me, really interesting. So other people want to get involved in this. So the government wants to understand more about how the economy works. The farmers want to communicate with other farmers to find out what they're planning, what tricks they have to grow things better. And then the wholesalers, who can be small wholesalers or big buyers, want to be able to plan what their supply is better. And that can start to happen on a platform that starts from a very simple platform idea. Since it's a technology conference, I have to show, of course, a picture of a robot, but I have a reason, not just because I can, that there's things like robot pay out there, which again raises a whole new set of issues. And for me, this is a marker for me of how as we start to think about ecosystems, are we going to look to those blockchain smart contracts to automate some of these things, or are we going to look to rules within the ecosystem? Can there be a set of rules that are delivered that people understand, that are simple, and that bring together everyone in the ecosystem? So sort of two very different ways of doing things. And we've been thinking a lot about the rules approach, not only just because MasterCard, like Visa, is a rules-based company. Why is this important? The number of internet devices, this Internet of Things, we're talking about 20 billion devices connected to the internet by 2018. Okay, so when we think a lot of those are sensors, I look at things like, well, what happens if something's so small? How am I going to display legal agreement? How am I going to authenticate legal agreement? How am I going to enforce that when it's just physically not possible? So platforms work through a notion of APIs. So APIs to me are a way that you plug from one system to another and you have a two-way exchange of data. My favorite example is that if I create a mobile app and I want to have you put in an address and then plot it on a map, I just use a Google or other maps API. You plug in your address, you get it plotted on a map, happens seamlessly. It's great. And so the APIs have become an important part of how I look at things. It's also informed my approach to the practice of law recently. So one of the groups I covered was our API team. And I went, the first call I had with the head of the API team was one of those uncomfortable calls that lawyers have because technology people just simply don't believe lawyers know anything at all about technology. So I had a conversation. He said, what do you know about APIs? And I said, I'm not saying I know a lot, but I think they're tremendously important. Here's what I know about them. Here's some APIs I actually use. You know, my Twitter feed automatically goes as an update into Facebook. And we had a 45-second conversation, and he said, you know a lot. The only thing you don't know is actually how to write to them, and you can learn that really quick. I'd be happy to show you. And as a result of that, it became really easy for me to work with this group because they respected the basic knowledge that I had and came to me early and often with their questions. So this led to something. So I started to say, that 45 seconds was sort of enough in a way. I mean, obviously he knew that I knew something, but can we duplicate that? Can we scale that in a way? And I said, what's important is not this deep technical knowledge, but technological familiarity. Now, I sometimes have been saying lately that innovation happens when you have a problem and no budget. And so my idea here was like, hey, if I could duplicate what I did for other people, and we could have like a one-pager that said, here's the basics of this technology, here are the main legal issues you run into, here's some questions you might ask, and give them a set of resources where they could go look further, that would really advance the cause, and we might be able to accomplish something and get more respect from the business and technology people. So I floated this idea, and because Center of Excellence is a big term at MasterCard lately, it's the New Technology Center of Excellence. We put together, the idea was say, let's try this with a group of lawyers and others and see if we can pick some topics and put together this white paper and a set of resources and roll this out and do some education so people can work on this. And so we asked for volunteers. We had over 50 lawyers volunteer to be part of this, so we turned it into a just-in-time learning and ongoing volunteer education program. We chose we had some goals, so just-in-time education, actionable and practical knowledge. So we wanted to do this one-pager, and we wanted to funnel things into best practices. And we wanted to become trusted advisors so that eventually we would get a seat at the table when our technology and business people want to make major decisions. And so that comes from a simple thing. We picked APIs, we picked blockchain, we picked tokenization to start with. This year we did open source, cloud computing, and identity management. And next year we'll do another set of problems. So somebody talked about outcomes in the corporate world. But what we want to accomplish is in how we think about in the Agile lawyering is easily and instantly activate new products. And so we've done some things to really streamline the product release process, do more click-throughs, and we're exploring different ways to do those things. So there is, I think, a motion here that's important for lawyers and law students to say, how can you expand what you do out to the larger view of ecosystems? And I think you become more relevant, more indispensable, and more engaged with your clients. So I just want to go back to the key traits. I think this notion of speed, good and now is better than perfect and late, is important to us. And I also think I wanted to point out, as I was thinking through things today, none of the traits we're looking for here is working better with outside counsel. It's almost like they don't enter the picture because this is the fun stuff, this is the stuff that we want to do ourselves. So I like to end with 3 action steps for people, simple things you can do. So one I suggest, you take a piece of paper and sketch out something you're interested in, the platforms that you interact with on a regular basis to get a feel for what the platform economy is. Could be technical or technological or economic systems. The second thing is, I think you need to learn something between now and the end of the year. And I think these conferences are great because you can take one thing that you learned today and say, I want to learn that to be good on it by the end of the year. And the third thing I think is to volunteer. So in your organization, your firm, your company, what can you do to get closer to the edge and take on the risk of volunteering for a new project that will help you learn what's coming in the future and get engaged in that and give you a new skill set and make you more valuable to your current employer and more valuable when you go out into the market. I'm super accessible. This is like the easy way to get to me, and this just shows you that one of the highlights of my year was seeing the totality of the eclipse in Missouri. Thank you very much.